Welcome, everybody. We're here with Quinn Mason, the winner of the Quintet division of our recent call for scores. Welcome, Quinn.
Hi, nice to be here.
Awesome. Well, Quinn is an incredible composer and also a conductor. Quinn, could you just tell us a little bit about yourself, your time in school, how you came to composing, your approach to becoming a conductor, anything that can help the YouTube audience learn a little bit more about you.
Sure, I'm gonna see if I can keep it real quick because it's a long story. But I've been composing music ever since I was 10 years old, and it was kind of funny the way I got to learn about composing music or how I came to composition in the first place. So when I was in elementary school, I used to be a cellist, and I started piano in elementary school too. I still play the piano, but I no longer play the cello. But when I was playing the cello, I took cello lessons, and one of the things I would do, and I'm sure we've all done this or not, is instead of practicing the etudes that my teacher would give me, I would write my own etudes and practice those instead. And so I would take these etudes to my teacher, and I'd be like, "Look what I did." Of course, I kind of snitched on myself, like I didn't do my homework, but I was 10 years old, and my teacher was looking at this etude I had written, and she tried to play it, and being 10 years old and hearing something that you had written, it's kind of mind blowing. It's like, oh my gosh, and that kind of set me on the path because I just couldn't believe that I created this music out of thin air, and I thought I want to go farther with this, and I want to do more with this. So after a while, composition took a front seat and cello took a back seat to the point where we just kicked the cello out of the car, basically. And composition became my primary thing. And I didn't really start conducting until I got into high school when I joined my school band. And I was still composing. I'd written the composition and asked my band teacher if I could conduct it. It was a fanfare for band called Bulldog Fanfare, and it was premiered at the graduation of 2013, and I conducted it twice. I conducted it then, and I conducted it at my own graduation in 2015. But my primary thing is orchestral conducting. I grew up around the orchestra, and I the orchestra is extremely spiritual to me. That's my church, so to speak. So ever since I was little, I would go to the Dallas Symphony rehearsals and I would watch the different conductors work. And that gradually set me on the path to getting inside of the orchestra and working with it from the inside out. So I played in the orchestra as a cellist, as a percussionist, and now I mostly conduct orchestras as well. So
Very cool. And how did you get involved with the band? I know you said you played cello and piano. Were you playing piano with the school wind ensemble with the school band, or were you playing a wind instrument or a brass instrument?
I was a percussionist. I joined late.
The
I
one
joined
thing that I didn't just say. Perfect.
right. I joined my sophomore year as a percussionist during marching season, so they put me
Yeah.
on quads, and I had no experience on quads prior, so I had to learn like quick. But like, I love playing timpani, and I've discovered that, so I took to the quads fairly easy, and I have a perfect pitch, so I could easily discern the pitches of the four drums that were in front of me. Now my back is still hating me all these years later, but it was a lot of fun for sure.
That's the case for most quad players.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. um, Thank you for that. I know that's an awesome origin story, so to say. I had a friend tell me that their first composition was they didn't have notation software, so they did it on PowerPoint, and they just clicked and dragged like notes and a staff.
Oh
So
my gosh.
I know. So it's really interesting the different kinds of origins or where people started or and how they started. You know. But anywho, moving forward, so you played percussion, cello, and piano. So that's kind of already a wide range of instruments. But I'm also interested to hear what your inspirations are, like sounds that you particularly like. What kind of music do you listen to? Composers that you admire or respect? And also, very quickly, did you say you graduated in 2015
Yes.
from high school?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, me too, man. That's cool.
Hey, class of 15.
Yeah. Well, go ahead. Go ahead with the other previous question.
Well, so I'm a firm believer in being eclectic as a composer. So the range of music I listen to is extremely wide. I've listened to everything from West African kora music, which is extremely relaxing music, to one guilty pleasure I like to enjoy is salsa music. I don't know how to salsa dance, but I really do like the music, and groups like Grupo Nietzsche and Salsa Brava and stuff like that, El Fania, stuff like that. I've done all my research on that, but I really like Latin music, primarily because I grew up around, I had Hispanic friends growing up, and they kind of turned me on to that music, especially like banda music and all that. And I've done everything from, I've produced EDM albums. That I know that sounds weird, but
I'm interested to hear that.
I have a friend who's a DJ, and I've accompanied him on gigs to Uptown and stuff like that. He'd have the booth, and it'd be like this huge packed club, and he'd just be working the dance floor, and that kind of set me on the path of exploring that type of music. And in 2012 and 2015, I produced 2 EDM albums privately. So they're not online, but
I was going to ask if they were on your website or not.
no, but if you look really hard, you can find one EDM track I did. One.
Okay.
That sounds like a challenge.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Very cool. Well, why don't we transition? So we're here. We have the reason for being here being the call for scores. We have a collection of very fantastic, eclectic, as you said, composers. Can you talk a little bit about your quintet? The process you went through composing it, where you were at the point in time, what that music, in your opinion, says, and anything you want to share about this piece that everyone is going to be very familiar with in a few months.
Sure. So this piece is actually my third piece for brass ensemble, but my first piece for quintet. So prior to that, I wrote a piece called the Masonian Rondo in 2013 that won the American Composers Forum Next Notes Award when I was a senior in high school. And that award pretty much launched my career, but it was a brass quartet.
Okay.
And after that, I wrote a piece the year after that. Well, actually, the same year. Sorry, let me backtrack. So 2013, I wrote that piece. 2015 was the year I won that contest. And that same year, I wrote a piece called There's Been a Breach, which is for brass quintet.
Okay.
So I guess this piece is my second piece for brass quintet, but There's Been a Breach was the first. And that one won a contest 2 years after that from Texas A&M. And I got to work with David Maslanka on it, and he was really, really cool to work with. And that same year, 2017, was the year I wrote this brass quintet, just called Brass Quintet. And so that year I was at TCU, and I was studying with Dr. Blaise Ferrandino, and this piece was an assignment because I told him, I really want to, try something here, something long form, something multi-movement. And he was like, what is something that you would like to explore more? And I thought the brass quintet was a very interesting instrument, especially with the addition of the French horn, which is also used in the woodwind quintet. I thought that was really interesting. But in the context of a brass quintet, I thought that was really, really cool too. And so with these 3 movements, it was originally in 4 movements, but the third movement was unplayable, so I took it out. But these three movements that I've written, the first is a fanfare, which, all brass instruments are known for fanfares. And I wanted to see if I could write one that kind of went through all kind of feelings. So, we have a feeling of triumph, and then we have a feeling of kind of like laid back, chilling almost. And then the second movement, I like to write a lot of introspective music, a lot of music because I've been told that I'm a deep thinker, and I, accidentally discovered that yes, I do think deep think deeply about things, sometimes too much. But I like to write music about how I'm feeling. And I guess I was kind of depressed when I wrote that music, the second movement, which is called Depressed State of Mind, because I was at a point in my college career where I was facing uncertainty about looking forward. I was like, what am I going to be doing, you know, 2 months from now, a year from now, stuff that college students think about. And so instead of, doting on that, I just wrote music about it, that's just what I've always done. And, it's kind of like, yeah, you may have to cut this whole part out, but it's kind of like, I express what I'm feeling the best in music. I I'm also a writer, but ever since I was little, music has always been my primary, you know, medium expression. And then the third movement, the burlesque, was inspired by one of my favorite film composers, Elliot Goldenthal. If you know him, he wrote the music to, Alien 3 and stuff like that. And he actually wrote a, I was inspired. This whole piece was inspired by his second brass quintet, which he wrote in 1980. Not a lot of people know that piece, but it was some piece that I accidentally stumbled on over, and I really really liked it. And he wrote a burlesque in that piece, so I decided to write my own version of a burlesque. So.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Yeah. Do you feel that I'm looking through the score right now, and I've listened to the piece a number of times. I did my own snooping around as not a judge, but just as an enthusiast of the scores that were sent in. What do you feel? You're talking about the eclectic nature of the music that you've surrounded yourself with. What would be the first things you think people would hear when they listen to a performance of this piece? They would say, this person listens to blah, this person is enthusiastic about X style of music. You feel like there's a lot of cross contamination in this quintet?
Well, and that goes back to the question that Mr. Flores asked, which is about the the different influences of mine, which I didn't really get to say. So I'm really influenced by the music of John Adams lately.
Okay.
Because I'm really just taken by his harmonies and his rhythm, and the way he just treats the instruments is very, very colorful, and it's very, very fascinating to me. And so when I was embarking on composing this piece, I looked to all of the concert music of Elliot Goldenthal, not just the brass quintet. So, I mean, did you know he wrote a symphony in G sharp minor?
I did not know that.
It's quite interesting. Well, he actually reused some of his film music. I feel like he was cheating a little bit, but it's such an interesting piece of music that I was like, he's not only a film composer, he's actually a really really cool concert composer in his own right. And with this piece, I wanted to bring the best of, what I had learned from studying his pieces to what the training that I had been through, which is, the first movement is very contrapuntal, and that was from my studies with Robert Xavier Rodriguez, not the director of Spy Kids, by the way, but but I studied with him in the summer of 2013, and he was actually one of the last students of Nadia Boulanger. And one of the way he was taught by her was the way he taught me to actually think deeply about the music that I'm writing, and I think deeply about how the different parts fit together. And so, as a result, you'll see in that first movement that all the different movements, different parts, excuse me, they're very different from each other, but they fit together perfectly,
Mm-hmm.
And it's something when I was going to, as this was an academic, composition that I had fun with, I went back to the craft of composition,
Mm-hmm.
and I thought, I want a piece that's really, really interesting to take apart and then put back together, and also really, really cool to listen to.
Awesome. You may have mentioned this earlier, but I probably fell asleep or something. But where did you do your undergraduate, or where did you grow up?
So I grew up in Dallas, Texas, and that's where I live now. And I've had a weird college career. So not even a week after I graduated in 2015, I started Richland College, the community college, and I studied there for 2 years with Dr. Jordan Cuspa, an amazing composer and friend. And after that, I spent a year at TCU, which is where I wrote this piece. And then after TCU, I spent a further 2 years at SMU, where I studied composition with Dr. Lane Harder. And I'm leaving SMU this year without a degree, and I'm starting my career early at the age of 24.
Congratulations.
Thanks. It's very scary.
I understand. Just for a little perspective, I mean, Jose and I have basically ended our tenure at the University of Texas. Jose graduated with his music studies degree, otherwise known as music education by the rest of the universe, and I'm all but dissertation for my doctorate at the University of Texas. So I am out of classes to take and into the real world. But that's very interesting. One thing I was curious about as you were talking, taking the piece apart, putting it back together, do you feel like at any level that your experience as a conductor influences the way that you put together pieces, either rehearsal technique of, these things mesh in a rehearsal way, you would rehearse these things, they're interesting by themselves, they create this kind of unit, and putting it together, do you feel like there's the conductor in you grouping your composition in a certain way?
Yes, and I feel that most of my compositions are influenced by my conducting, because when you conduct, you have a chance to feel music, and you get to feel it through your body and physically, because you can physically touch the page, but you can't physically touch the notes and the feeling of the music. But with conducting, you can feel it throughout your body and all that, and that actually informs my composition a lot, because I approach whatever I write from how it feels now. And there's a quote from Esapeka Salonen that goes, if I hadn't had the experience of conducting, I wouldn't know how my music would feel, And so I do encourage every composer to conduct at some point, because it will give you a whole new outlook on the music you write, and it will inform it, because that's another part you might have to cut out. Let me see if I can start over with this start.
No, it's human, I'm enjoying everything you're saying. Especially, I mean, I'm fascinated personally by Renaissance musicians in a way. The idea of being masterful in multiple places. The conductor composer thing, that's in a way ancient. That's how every notable composer from the times we studied, they have a relationship between the conducting and the composition. Nowadays, we don't have that. We've had the professionalism split those two things, but I think it's very valuable to be able to experience your music at a tactile level. I agree 100% as someone who is a performer, a teacher, and I arrange. It's almost impossible to get an outcome that you want, to understand what you're putting out there, if you're not also engaged in the output of it. And I think that's one thing that you're getting at with conducting, especially in terms of conducting your own compositions.
For sure, I completely agree with that, and like I said, it's like a completely new way of looking at music, because it's like the best of both worlds, for sure.
One last thing about this duality. Do you feel like there's a music you like in terms of you as the composer? Is there a music that you like as you the conductor, and vice versa? Is there anything you don't like in either sphere? Do you feel like you have two separate musical identities in terms of taste?
Sometimes I found that there are some pieces that I love listening to that I would never touch with a 10-foot baton, but there are some pieces that I love conducting that, I would just conduct and I would listen to them casually. I've actually premiered several pieces by my colleagues. And, it's always a great thing working with composers as a composer because, you're different. It's like two of the same mind, but like, it's kind of like, I love working with this piece, but it's like, I would just conduct it. I wouldn't really listen to it casually.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as like, you know, what the pieces that I like listening to that I would never conduct, it's always a lot to learn from that I could, you know, I would study the scores and I would conduct through the scores and I would see, this is how this composer put this together and this is how they did this and this is how they did that, and it works, it informs me in that sense,
Mm-hmm.
something like that.
Definitely. No, I think there's a lot to learn, not just from your experiences as being a composer and a conductor, but the idea of understanding that mentality, the idea of being at the podium constructing a sound as a conductor, and the idea of being a composer and constructing a sound from, quote unquote, nothing, being there in your isolation, in a way, writing music without the orchestra and then being the conductor performing the music with the orchestra. I think that's a really interesting perspective. Another thing about perspective, we of course created this call for scores because in brass chamber music we were hoping to create a new platform, a new repertoire of music by composers who aren't represented in the mainstream canon. People from different communities, ethnicities, backgrounds, origins. Could you share your experience, any thoughts you might have about growing up in classical music as an African American conductor, composer, musician as a whole? Any words you might have for those listening who might not have someone who looks like them, or someone who represents their community to follow in their footsteps?
Sure thing. And so I'm very fortunate to have had mentors who are very supportive of my art, you know, of my music, no matter what I look like. And, growing up, I didn't think it was all that bad, but like, I remember when I was about 15 or so this would have been a few years ago, more than a few actually, I discovered the music of Florence Price
Mm-hmm.
and William Grant Still. And until then, I had no idea who they were. I didn't think, and I looked them up and I did my research, and I was like, wow, I didn't know there were other Black people writing music like this. You know, I mean, that hearing that William Grant Still Afro American Symphony really kind of opened my eyes, and then learning about Florence Price, who was the first Black woman to have music played by a symphony orchestra in the 30s. It was extremely fascinating, and it got me thinking about, they laid the path for me to do what I do because I primarily work in the symphony orchestra field, and so they got me thinking, and most of the music that I write it's just introspective. There's no alluding to a certain political thing or whatever, but I do realize the importance of mentorship, the importance of advocacy, and stuff like that. And I do talks for at-risk youth here in Dallas. And I talk to them about, the composition process and stuff like that. And I'm really active in the musical community, and I do composition lessons and all that. And I always realize that it's always extremely valuable to have people who have someone to look up to you that looks like you. And for young children especially, they're curious about everything. But when you have children who had never been exposed to classical music, and they see someone that looks like them doing this, they start to get curious and they start to explore more. And that's what I like to do, is start early and create that kind of sense of wonder for them. And it's extremely important. And I hope that one day I can get to a position where I can mentor more, even the younger generation, the people that are my age, maybe when I'm 30 or 35 mentor people that are my age and let them know that you too can feel comfortable as a musician, not just a musician of color, but as a musician in the 21st century, you know?
That's such a beautiful answer. I
Oh,
really appreciate that, especially the component of mentorship. I'm actually curious. I'm wondering what changes, if any, you would like to see in the classical music um, community.
changes like as far as
I mean, I guess kind of like education or institutions. Um,
okay, yes. So it's important to get out into the community and have, free public concerts that keep the public engaged and curious. And also the education of the younger generation is always extremely important because they're the ones that are going to pass it to the future generation and so forth. And so as far as I'm a product of education, public school education, and I didn't really have access to music programs when I was growing up. I had, mandatory piano classes, and I had choir when I was in elementary school, and then middle school. I didn't really do much. I mean, there was a band, but they weren't that big or worth joining. And then high school, I did band, but it's like as far as like real music programs, most of that stuff that I know about music, I have to seek out on my own. I have to go to DSO concerts on my own and stuff like that. But you know, if you go in the schools and then you give these talks to these children, there's no doubt that one of them a light bulb will go off and they'll get curious and they'll beg their parents for lessons and stuff like that, and that's how it starts, you know.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. So we're nearing the end of this interview. I'm wondering if we can get a scoop on any future projects that you're working on or anything you have in mind.
Sure, I'm currently working on 7 commissions. it's a I've got a boatload of stuff to do, but my most notable commissions are I'm writing a piece for the Music Nova Orchestra. They're based in Phoenix, Arizona. I was supposed to be one of their compositional fellows last month, but what hit. I don't need to say it, and it got postponed. And so I was supposed to give the Arizona premiere of my Irish Dance Suite, but instead I spoke to the music director, and I'm writing a brand new piece on the topic of rebirth, and it's going to be called Svitani, which is the Czech word for dawn. So it's kind of like a new beginning, almost, especially since that's what their season is going to be about. And so there's that piece. I'm working on a new piece for the Dallas Symphony Orchestra. They commissioned me for the second time, and they're commissioned me for a piece that they're going to do on November 11th. As to what I'm writing for, I'm not sure, but it's going to be for sure a socially distanced version of the orchestra. So that'll be interesting. And so that's my next big project. And then another thing I'm doing is a huge project 2 seasons from now. I'm working on my 5th symphony, and this is going to be for a conductor friend in Seattle who will premiere it. He's going to premiere it up there, and this is also going to be on the topic of kind of rebirth, rebuilding, but looking at it from a different point of view and not necessarily alluding to events that's happening right now. And then one more thing, I'm also working on 3 pieces for solo clarinet, much like the Stravinsky 3 pieces. And these are going to be for a good friend of mine, Danny Goldman, who plays in the Dallas Opera Orchestra. And he's going to premiere them at the International Clarinet Conference next year.
Wow.
Well, rock on. Is this fifth symphony? Is it for orchestra as well?
Yes.
Very cool. Awesome. Well, I guess we'll let you get back to writing that. Thank you so much, Quinn, for spending some time with us, for trusting our organization, sending us your music, and giving us the opportunity to talk about music with you and talk about this odd time we're in, and everything we can do, the community, those watching, can do to help make classical music a little bit better for everybody. So you can find a little bit more about Quinn at his website, which I will put somewhere on this screen post-production. And we hope to be able to bring you a really great performance of Quinn's brass quintet very soon. So thank you, Quinn. Thank you, audience. Subscribe to the channel. We'll see you soon. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.